Hi everyone, I'm Carla. I'm a food addict, compulsive eater, and bulimic. I weigh and measure 3 meals a day from the gray sheet. I write those meals down. I call them into my sponsor. I eat those meals and nothing else in between. And just for today, abstinence is the most important thing in my life without exception. And my abstinence date is March 31st, 2007. A slight addendum to my mantra. I text them in on the weekend, and that is my sponsor's request, not my request. So that brings me to the fact that I do not do this alone. I tried for years and years and years to take off weight and to pretty much to take off weight. I didn't really get that food was the problem. I had seen my dad seemingly dieting successfully. His whole thing was he'd, do some sort of crash diet, which was the languaging back there in the 70s and 80s, which in and of itself is so funny to me, crash diet. And he'd lose the weight so that he could go back and eat the way he had done before. And this was just a cycle for him, known as, yo-yo dieting in some circles. And that was never successful for me, but that is what I did from the time I was 11 until I came into Gray Sheet at 43. Um, yeah. So let's see. Let's go back. But what I have learned is that I was the problem in some ways, in that I thought that I could do it alone. I grew up thinking I was supposed to be able to do it alone, both within my family of origin and, in our society. We are a very individualistic society, and, pulling myself up by my bootstraps and things like that. And I was born significantly after my sister and brother. And so I did have a quite an isolated childhood. My parents, which I can really empathize with now, they were like done. I can't imagine having a 13 and a 15-year-old and finding out I was accidentally pregnant. They were so close to to a very significantly different level of parenting, and then suddenly they had a baby. So, but what that meant for me is my every um, significant survival need was cared for. I did not want for food, shelter. And, I know that my parents loved me, but their ability to make that clear was pretty limited. So I'll stop trying to language that in a good way. I know they did their best. They're gone now. Um, and I've done some work around that. So I turned to food early on. I don't know if I was an addict when I came into the world, but I sure didn't last very long as a normie if I was not an addict. I food was really constant. My mom snuck food. It seemed really normal to sneak food, and fun and kind of exciting, which that kind of behavior is still something I deal with, the naughtiness. Um, and and I saw my dad go through this weird relationship with food where he would eat inordinate amounts of food, especially treats and desserts. And I was lauded as a good eater. My parents, apparently my sister and brother must have been very picky, because I was a good eater, and so much so that they would, that would be mentioned if there were friends over, or if we went out to dinner with people, or, I was no trouble to take out to dinner. And I was very good with grown-ups, because, the rest of my family, my extended family, they were my sister and brother's age. So I was really, my cousins were all significantly older. My family, they were really more like aunts and uncles, my cousins and such. So, um, yeah, so I was pretty messed up with food. I hung out with the grown-ups at birthday parties and would help, set the table and clear the table, because that's where you got extra food. And I was in there to take up those offers of, would you like to take some home? And, well, of course I wanted to. And I thought my parents would really like that, I would say. And so I also became, a compulsive liar. And so I started gaining weight when I was about 8 and went on my first diet at my mom's uh, doing at 11. And so stayed on a variety of different diets. This was during the beginning, or what I knew to be the beginning of the various diet shakes. And, my mom, someone said the word Shackley's the other day on a meeting, and I hadn't heard that in a long time, but that was one of the pyramid schemes, they called them at the time, that my parents were involved in. And so we did those, and then, a commercial brand called Alba 77s. And, my friends and I would just put all kinds of obscene ingredients into the blender with the Alba 77 and somehow feel like that was doing something. So I just, puberty came along. I had these fresh stretch marks that hurt so bad and were so red. I looked like a map. And it coincided beautifully, she says sarcastically, with having to go into the first group showers and group dressing in a locker room in PE, and not having the uniform fit me. And this was not a time when, fat was not okay. No designers were out there making clothes for fat people. So my option was to go out and get, like hefty man shorts. And they were a different color than everybody else's. And the uniform top, they still didn't cover my body well. If I bent over at all, which, is required in PE, I was just exposed, my around my stomach. It was just horrible. And it was really okay to make fun of fat people. And it wasn't just fat people, it was kooky back then. There were bullies. And then I became the bully because I felt like if I took control of making fun of me, 8 minutes already. Oh, I'm having so much fun. Thank you, Karen. And so I graduated from high school at about 220, and I did this 60 to 80 pound weight loss between 220 and say 250, 275 through many diets, Nutrisystem, Weight Loss Clinic, Jenny Craig, did both of those a few times. My parents paid for those. Um, and so I had this whole, I was not getting the approval I was looking for from them. I was failing. There was lots of evidence that I was failing at this, and that I was weak-willed, and that I should feel shameful. And they were not cruel people. These were not, wasn't finger pointing and whatnot, but it was just so there. And so somewhere along the lines, well, actually, when my mom died, I was a very immature 28 years old, and I went into therapy. And I thought that therapy was then going to be the route to me losing weight. And, it just wasn't. But it was interesting. I had a number of therapists talk to me with some version of languaging of spiritual crisis. And, but I tried mainstream religion, and I didn't feel like I was one of the chosen ones. And so I took myself out of that quickly and chose drugs. And so I lived alone, and had a series of jobs, not a good employee at all. I come from the side of our compulsive eating family that did just enough to get by. I don't know of an overachiever inside me. Still, still so that's me. Um, After living alone, and I really got how progressed my disease was when I lived with my first partner, because she was in the way. She and her stepdaughter were in the way of my food, my relationship with my food. And so I got more desperate. I was eating more in the car. I was being less productive, because when my partner was gone, I was eating at home all the time, or running to the grocery store and getting food. And I would eat the food that I was supposed to be making for dinner and have to go back out. And it was just absolutely crazy. we did some dieting together, something really sane like Weight Watchers, where I'd go in and they'd say, yes, it's not a good idea to eat Thanksgiving dinner, load up on the salads and, these things that they would say to normies. And that was the one weight loss program that it seemed like there were some people who had a bit of success. So that just kind of fed my I'm weak-willed and shameful part of me. But then my partner had a little mini intervention, which is why we were together in my mind. And because we're not anymore. And she said, I think you're a powerful woman, always a good way to start a sentence. And I don't think you can do this alone. I think you're an addict and I think you need help. And she knew about Overeaters Anonymous. I said, okay, I'll go right after my 40th birthday so I can have some birthday carb. And I did. And it was great because it was in a building that I knew. And so there was some familiarity. And I believed them when they said, we hope you come to love us the way we already love you. And I felt that shit that got through this armor that I had built up in weight, etc. So I really got a lot out of Overeaters Anonymous. I got to start searching for a higher power. I did the steps, and no one would talk about the food. So I did the 3 meals a day with nothing in between. And and the word sensible was talked about sometimes when you did that. But at some point, it became 3 smorgasbords. And at night, I had a cocktail because some people, that was sensible for some people. And then I just started lying to my sponsor. And I never gave up. The other thing was people usually give up the white stuff. So I just found the brown stuff. And it was more expensive and at health food stores, but it was just as easy to binge. And so that stuff was always in my body. Fast forward a bit, life really lifed in no matter what kind of ways. And I turned full bore to the food and went from about 275 up into the 300s and was miserable and was really having some mobility issues, numbness all through my arms and hands when I'd wake up, bad sleep apnea. And my marriage was breaking up and I'd lost my job. And so and one of the things that my partner, it was not a legal marriage at that time, um, said was, it really was a deal breaker when I saw that frozen carb container on top of your CPAP machine. And so, yeah, so that was not good. I'd known about Gray Sheet, had a really bad rap from the OA people, all the things that we know that they say and that people say. And I wasn't ready for it, so I wasn't listening. And but I didn't know what to do. I knew I couldn't go back out into the diet market because I believed I was an addict and I couldn't afford a fat farm or an inpatient situation, or I probably would have done that. I couldn't afford weight loss surgery. I'm so grateful, but I probably, I was envious of those people. I was envious way back in my youth with people who used to have their stapled, they would have their and only be able to eat liquids. So grateful for that. So walked into an annual meeting of Overeaters Anonymous and saw Women with the Glow. They got me started. I've been doing, I don't know why it took. I've been doing Gray Sheet now for 18 years. It's an absolute miracle every morning when I wake up. I know many of you on these screens, my relationships in Gray Sheet are so important to me. And I have gotten to do the work of learning how to be in relationship with all you all. It has not been perfect. There is no perfection required. I do a lot of service because that keeps me in the middle of the herd. And that's where I understand I want to be. So that 1 minute, when I'm in a no matter what, when I'm feeling desperate and don't know where to turn, even if the food's not right there in my mind, but the ism is, I want that phone to not weigh 3,000 pounds when I need to dial it and get some sanity from one of you. And so I don't mean to make it sound like it doesn't weigh some weight, but it is much easier because I have you all. If you're new, pick up that phone and call people because GreySheeters know why you're calling. When I was in OA, calling was suggested, but no one was doing that. And so I made a few calls and people seemed confused why I was calling. GreySheeters know why you're calling. You know, you can ask for recipes. There's things you can do. Do I have 1 more minute left or am I toast? That is me toast. So this is a solution for me, and I hope that you find what you need here. And I'm so grateful for all you all, and I pass.